You know, in the 90s and the early 2000s, whatever you call that first decade, I was doing a lot of playing, and but also I was thinking a lot about. I made a database of the evolution of cornets. It struck me that these things evolve. A friend of mine looking at the wall, he says, anybody looking at this wall can tell you're a paleontologist. And I had things lined up by when the horns were made because, unlike fossils, horns come with serial numbers, usually, except for the very oldest ones. So it's easier to work out the chronological history of these things. And then um, I came to see the most general definition of evolution as the fate of transmissible information in space and time. So that fits the genetics of organisms and evolutionary biology, but also these beautiful cornets too, because unlike trumpets, these things diversified like mad and changed a lot since the 1830s. But what's going on with the information, of course, is very different than genetic information. These are designed by human beings, and they're meant to play. My old office at the American Museum of Natural History, which I was in until about 2011, 2012, when I vacated for my successor to come in, there was a semi-partition. On the other side of this partition were my trilobites. And there was a time in the 70s, I would say mostly intensely in the 1970s, when punctuated equilibria came out, but I was still publishing on trilobites extensively. This is very similar to the feeling I had back in the 70s with the trilobites, because I know every one of these horns. I have a tendency to go to the oldest stuff. I mean, I like Latin in school rather than French. I liked the Paleozoic for the fossils, and so I like the deep part of the 19th century for my cornets. Here's one. Here's the style of the original cornet. It's French. They came in about in the mid 1820s. This was the first version of adding valves, which changes the length of the horn. This was the original. This is an American bugle, but it's also in B flat. Plays great. But this is this with valves added to it. That allows you to get some chromaticism because a bugle, a natural trumpet, just plays the overtone series. So if you want to play chromatically, you want to play a tune, you got to play way up there on these open horns. So to play in down in a soprano register like these things, you had to find a way to do make it chromatic. And it was only, I gather, in the 1820s that metallurgical processes had improved to the point where you could build a piston valve. So I would say that that's an example of science and technology enabling design, because everybody wants to be able to play like you're singing da 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 da. You play those notes, you can't do that on this, but you can do it on this. The next thing that happened was, if you're playing in the lower register on this thing, you can't play chromatically. So they put the third valve on, and this was about, I think, in the late 1830s. And these valves were invented by a German craftsman. So it's the need to make good, beautiful music chromatically, which really forced the addition of this kind of valve to it. But anyway, one of the defects of that design was that the air comes up and goes up through the valve, which is kind of strange. The valves have to be no wider, the diameter of the valve, no wider than the diameter of this tubing. And it makes for sort of fragile kind of valves. But then the next thing that happened, might as well, I'm going to not run through the whole thing because we want to talk about, I am talking about the evolution, but here's the historical data. This is my lab. These are my specimens. That all good sort of intellectual, scientific considerations, you need a baseline of data, absolutely, because what you're trying to do is understand the data, and you're constrained by the data, but also the data suggests their own solutions to the problem and all that sort of thing. Everybody just assumes these were the same as those. And I was looking at photographs, and I said, wait a minute, and I turned the page back, and I said, that's not one of these things where the air goes up into the valve. This is the modern valve. And at that point, that was the oldest example that I knew of, 1843, I think it was. So I think it's great. It's like it illustrates what I call the Hanna principle. It's not evolution. This valve did not change into this valve. This is an alternate concept. They're homologous only as piston valves, but that's it. This is the same body design as that other one, the original one. And they tried to make everybody think that it was the original one. Clearly, these are ideas in people's heads. First, they test them, see if they work, and then the public will either accept or reject them and so forth. It's the battleground of the marketplace. And the information is different from biological information that way. So this is information to me because I can dissect it and look at it and play it too. It plays great. But the information is sort of latent there. It's always obvious.